Well, last week I spent 6 days in a place only about 10-minute drive from home, but I had entered a foreign country as surely as if I'd gone to Rwanda or Botswana or Kathmandu, because I had entered hospital land. I'll spare you all the gory details, but I was brought in for an emergency appendectomy, and then there were some complications, so I went in for a second surgery, and it just took a while. So I was in the hospital for several days and several nights. Hospitalland is a place with its own very distinctive language, rhythm, style, a semiotic system, if I can use the philosophical term. And therefore it's a place you have to adjust to as fully as you adjust to Paris or Vienna or some new city. What's distinctive about Hospitalland? Well, one thing is you lose any sense of time of day. There you are, and you're only vaguely aware of the movement of the sun across the sky. So someone says it's 2 o'clock, and I'd find myself asking in the morning or in the afternoon. You're in kind of a permanent twilight, a permanent haze in regard to time of day. One of the most remarkable differences is the usual public-private distinction just evanesces. It just disappears in Hospitalland. I mean, we have this sense of, what is appropriate publicly and then what's kind of part of your private life. That just disappears because, as my mother said many years ago when she entered Hospitalland, it's as though you put your modesty in a little bag and you put it by the hospital door and then you pick it up when you leave. But while you're in Hospitalland, any sense of modesty and privacy just goes away. I mean, nurses, aides, doctors, surgeons, anybody can look at pretty much any part of your anatomy any time of the day or night. And at first you're kind of appalled by this. I had never spent a night in a hospital before. As a priest, I'd been to Hospitalland many times as a visitor, but I'd never stayed there. So first you're kind of appalled by this, but I must confess after a while it's like, all right, sure. Who else wants to come take a look, because the public-private thing just disappears. There's a whole language of numbers, and you get accustomed to it very fast. So temperature and blood pressure rates and hemoglobin levels, and it's amazing how quickly you find yourself just trading in this rather arcane argot of numbers, but that's the way people talk in Hospitalland. Barging in any time of the day or night. There's no sense of like, here's the time to sleep, here's time to be awake. People just come and go as they please. But for me, the distinctive mark of Hospitalland, the defining quality is passivity. Now, I'm a pretty active guy, and I think most of us Americans are that type too, kind of go, and we're in charge. We like autonomy. Man, when you enter Hospitalland, you just surrender autonomy. You surrender control over your life. Now, they take you where you need to go. They clean you and prepare you, and they probe you, and they prod you, and they take blood out of you, and they cut into you, and they move you where you need to be. You just surrender to other people. You become very passive. One of the forms of, I think, almost psychological torture is waiting for test results. So a test is done and you don't know, you have no control over how it will come out. And all you can do is wait for them to tell you. When you're at your wit's end, you've been there now for, in my case, 6 days, you can't wait to get home. You can taste it, but you've got to wait passively until the doctor and the surgeon give permission for you to go. It's an exercise in passivity. Well, here's the thing. When I was in the hospital, this phrase kept coming unbidden into my mind. And the phrase is the divinization of one's passivities. It's a phrase that I learned years ago from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, one of the great French theologians of the last century, from his book called The Divine Milieu, one of the really great spiritual texts of the last century. A text I've taught for many years. I've taught this idea. Teilhard distinguishes there between what he calls the divinization of our activities and the divinization of our passivities. What's the former? The former is a very noble spiritual act by which I take my activities, my accomplishments, my achievements, and I turn them over to God. I say, Lord, I'm doing this for your sake. Teilhard was a Jesuit, so he had the Jesuit spirit of ad maiorem Dei gloriam, right, to the greater glory of God. So as I achieve, as I do, as I accomplish, I turn it over to God. Good. Nothing wrong with that. However, Teilhard said, and I think he's dead right about this, a far greater spiritual power is the divinization of our passivities. This means we turn not our great accomplishments over to God, but we turn to God's purposes. Our weakness, our suffering, our passivity, when things happen to us, when we have to endure something, we say, Lord, work with that. Lord, let me give this to you that you might work through, yes, even this suffering. Think now of someone who loses a job. Think of someone who suddenly is in Hospitalland, as I was, doing fine, you think, and then suddenly on your back in an attitude of passivity. Think of someone who suddenly loses a loved one. Think of someone who suddenly undergoes a great failure. Someone who suddenly gets bad news from the doctor. These aren't achievements. These are things that we endure. Can we turn them over to the transformative power of God? And Teilhard's wager is, that's when you really come to life spiritually. That's when the real power kicks in. Now, here's something that Christians ought to get pretty spontaneously. Our central icon, the great symbol of the faith, is not an accomplishment or an achievement. It's not like a Roman general having conquered his enemies. It's not a scientist having made a great discovery. It's not Atlas holding up the world. Our central icon is of this poor man nailed to a cross in a stance of utter passivity and suffering, having something done to him. That's the icon. That's the icon. Did Jesus accomplish things? Of course. Were his activities divinized? Sure. But the heart of the matter is the divinization of his passivity. Unless you take up your cross every day and follow me, you're not worthy to be my disciple. See, he's not saying unless you accomplish great things, unless you achieve at such a high level. No, unless you take up your cross, you learn to endure something. You know what comes to mind here too is the great Spanish spiritual master Juan de la Cruz, John of the Cross. He talks about the active and passive night of the soul. It has nothing to do with depression, by the way. What that means is, the first one, the active night of the soul, is the active purging of attachments. So I'm attached to various things, and they're getting in the way of my rapport with God. So I actively, on my own initiative, purge myself of them. Fine, says John of the Cross, fine. But the real action happens when you undergo the passive night of the soul. That's when you allow God to purge you of attachments. God to operate in you. You become passive and you let Him empty you out. That's why, when they asked John of the Cross, or when, not they, but rather when the Lord Himself said, "What do you want?" John of the Cross said, "I'd like to be forgotten, abandoned, and persecuted." So what he was saying was, do your work in me. Allow me to undergo the passive night of the soul. The divinization of our passivities, the passive night of the soul, that's what this journey through Hospitalland reminded me of. And more than reminded me, it forced me through it. I can't say that I'm eager to go back. I like to avoid Hospitalland as much as I can. I do hope, though, seriously, that if I do have to go back someday, that I can endure it precisely as a powerful spiritual moment.